This is an interview with Henry C. Hitch, Hitch, the late Henry C. Hitch of Guyman, which was made during his lifetime. Making the interview was Jane Henslee.
George, my younger brother, and I happened to be there. We had an old well there that had a windlass and pulley, and he sat on that well. We talked, and he told us he had been to Kansas City High School for 3 years. And of course, we just thought that was something wonderful, you know.
How old was he then, would you say?
I suspect he was about 17. I don't know. He's
and you were about what?
Well, I was probably 12 years old, maybe, and George was 9, approximately. And then another time he came over there, he came over to see my older sister, Della. And she and my other sister, Josephine, they were doing the cooking. And I remember he sat in the kitchen there while they were getting dinner.
Was he interested in your sister, Della?
He was, seemed to be, but she wasn't interested in him.
You should probably have very good sense.
Yeah. And I know he remember me telling her that a girl ought to be proud of the name of C. Slaughter.
He said that?
Yes. His uncle, you know, was a big cattleman down in Texas. Old C. Slaughter was a very wealthy cattleman in southwest Texas.
Oh, he was his uncle.
C. Slaughter, but W.
And W.B. was
his father. And he was just a spoiled boy, is what he was.
Now tell me about the racetrack where he used to go and bet on the horses.
Well, up down here on Frisco, south of Guyman, they used to have picnics up there, 4th of July. And Johnny McQuillan had a little glass case that he had 7 little horses on a little pedestal, and he could push a lever, and they would go around and round, and finally one of them would stop, you know, and one of them would win. Well, he sold cards, had 7 cards. He'd sell them for a dime apiece. And the horse that won, the man that had it would get 60 cents, and Johnny, Tommy McQuillan it was, instead of John. The horse that, the man that had the card of the horse that won would get 60 cents, and old Tommy would keep a dime. He did that for a year or two, and then old Bill Ewing, he was an old-time cowpuncher here, lived on the Paladora. He conceived the idea that he'd get one of those. And he brought it over there and set it up right, but still a ways off from Tommy's. Tommy was an Irishman. I remember very distinctly, of course, they had the horses of different colors, but one of them was a paint horse. And old Tommy says, they're at the quarter, they're at the half, they're at the 3/4. And it happened to be a paint horse, I remember. He says, the paint horse, and the paint horse has won the money. Who's got the paint horse? and old Bill, you know, he'd talk kind of slow, and he'd set his up. He'd say, they're at the quarter, they're at the half, they're at the 3/4. And the paint horse has won the money. Who's got the lucky card? Of course, any horse could have done it. The bay horse had been at the same, only I brought the paint horse down. And the paint horse has won the money. Who's got the lucky card?
About how old were they?
Who old? Tommy and Bill?
The people racing out there.
You mean the one that, the owners, old Bill?
Were they all young?
Oh, yeah. Of course, I would like to. I didn't have any money to bet on it, you know, to buy a card. I didn't have any money to buy a card. But, old Coney Slaughter and young John Snyder, they just sit there. I remember old Coney one time, he just sat there for an hour betting, you know. And of course, I guess he lost. I remember he and now Snyder's was a cattleman right up there on Coldwater. They had been there longer than Snyder, longer than Slaughter's. They were old-time cattlemen. They came in there from what was that town name? Georgetown, Texas, is where they were from. Way down there someplace.
Where on the Coldwater were the Snyders located?
They were this side of old W.B. Slaughter. It is about, probably from Guyman, it would be, I'd say 35 miles up to Snyder's, 40 miles, or 45 up to Slaughter's. But they fell out. They were, and didn't get along very well.
But this all took place after Mr. Slaughter built that big place?
Up there on Coldwater, yeah,
Uh-huh.
that big house. It was a big house in those days. It doesn't look so big now.
About when did he build that house?
Well, it was in the 90s. I don't know.
In the 90s?
Yes, in the 90s. I don't know.
Then this horse racing was
It was
gone in about in the late 90s?
Yes, in the 90s. No, about the middle 90s.
About the middle 90s,
Yeah.
when they were racing out
Yeah,
there.
and they were having those picnics down there on Coldwater. Now, Earl Walker was in here this morning. Now, Earl was a nephew of old man McDermott.
Myra McDermott?
Myra's daddy.
Uh-huh.
And he was after a little history, and I gave it to him. It was in the 90s when they had those picnics down there. And
The picnics down on the Frisco where the McDermott claim was?
oh yes, or Myra's. That was Myra's claim.
Yes, well, I've been down there. There isn't anything at
No.
all. We couldn't even find
Well,
a
there
foundation.
never was any house there.
Oh, there wasn't?
No, oh, she had a little shack. She proved it up.
Mm-hmm.
But they'd go up there and stay all night, you know, and then in later years, she married Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And after she proved it up, and then Steve took a claim up north of us here, of her on the flats.
Mm-hmm.
So they, you know, in those days, if a person had a half a mile of waterfront, they didn't think the flats was worth anything. But if you had a half mile of waterfront, why, you'd be entitled to the range. It's government land, halfway to the next water.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted it halfway to the next water. And Steve, I think, filed up here.
Wasn't that called Hooker Grove near the McDermott place where they had picnics?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is Hooker, you know, where the old house is down there yet. That
Yes.
is Hooker. That is Hooker's house.
Mm-hmm.
And Hooker sold out in the 90s. It
In
was
the 90s.
about, I don't know, in the early 90s. Old T.C. Schumaker came in here, and he bought the old Anchor D. Dudley. That's up there now. Freeman, Jack Freeman wrote it now.
I need to go there. I really need to go there.
He bought it clear down to old Billy Brown down here. Wilbur Hullerman owns Billy Brown place now.
I'll get it. Go ahead.
He bought it almost solid along the beaver down there. There's some place he didn't buy, they didn't want to sell.
I see, but as much as he could buy, and
Yeah.
then how far back did he own the other way on the beaver?
Well,
I don't know.
he bought the Hooker place, and I'd give him all the pasture.
After this moment, look,
Yeah.
How old was Debbie Beaton when he left? I went away and you never saw him again.
Tony?
I didn't call him.
Oh, he must have been 25 years old when the last time I saw him, probably.
Does that look like him?
Yeah, that looks like it. As well as I can remember. Of course, that's been, oh, golly, like 65 years ago, yes. 70, yeah, it's been
Yeah.
70 years ago.
How long did his father stay in that place down there?
Well, he sold out, I think, while I was in Kansas. I went up in Kansas on my father's ranch there, and was there from 1902 to 1908 when I came back down here. Now, and I don't remember. He might have sold out a little sooner than that, because I remember that during that time that Goff and Thompson bought him, bought Slaughter's. And Snyder stayed there few years longer before they sold out. I don't really know. My father bought the last cattle when Snyder sold out. They're brand new old B, and he bought them, and Snyder's son-in-law, Henry Bowman, bought some of their cattle, and they operated there. And my father bought them when they sold out. I remember very well. That was in the latter 90s.
Now, who are the people you mentioned that bought out W.B. Slaughter?
Goff and Thompson. I didn't know them.
Mhm.
They operated there for a few years, and they made quite a little money, and then the market slump caught them, and they just broke up, and the old man Thompson shot himself over here in Texoma. And Goff, I think, was really the money end of it. I never knew him. I met Thompson, but I wasn't very well acquainted with him. But Schumaker operated over here. He, of course, when he bought Hooker, Trailkill was Hooker's real name, John Trailkill.
Is that story they tell about him true? How he got the name Hooker?
Well, what was that story?
Oh, it had to do, well, it sounded like fiction, but I read it in the Pioneer Day edition some year of the paper.
Yeah, he came to some place and they called him Hooker. They thought he was.
Yes, they thought he was someone else, a general or someone coming to save them or something.
Well, it may have been. No, I should have asked him. I could ask him. I was well acquainted with Hooker, you know.
And Nat Goodell said Dad was well acquainted with him. And Mark Van Tyne said he interests him. He's very interesting to him, and he wishes he knew something about him. That very little actually is known about him.
About Hooker?
Uh-huh.
Well, now Dick Quinn one time said that Hooker and old W.A. Sullivan, you know, W.A. Sullivan was the daddy of old Hardesty, and he came to Guyman, and he said that Hooker W.A. Sullivan used to fight bulls across the plains here in the early days. Now, I don't know whether that is true or not. But anyway, Schumaker operated. He had probably 20 or 30,000 cattle up and down this Beaver and over on Frisco, and he was operating here when the railroad came through, and he sold these contractors hay, and he also sold them beef.
You mean the ones working on the railroad?
Yes,
Mhm.
contractors. And in the latter 90s, he went broke.
Mr.
Schumaker. And sold out to Stonebreaker. Everything to Stonebreaker.
These are both Schumaker sisters. This is branding on the Schumaker Ranch. Did Stonebreaker buy the original Schumaker spread? I mean,
All
take
of
the
it.
whole thing over?
Yeah, all of it. And then Stonebreaker operated for several years, a good many years, and then
But wait a minute, back to Schumaker. About what year did he go broke?
I think it was about 98 or 9. No, it was a little later than that. He was here when Guyman started, which had been 1901
That's
or
right,
2.
1901 or 2.
He was here, I know, when Guyman started.
And he acquired the Anchor D, the original, you know,
Old-
Anchor D,
old-
Dudley's Anchor D.
Yeah, old Anchor D.
Now, when
Dudley.
did he acquire that from Mr. Dudley?
Well, that was about 96, I think.
96.
95 or 6, maybe, or 4 or 5 or 6. I don't remember just the name of it.
Did you read that letter from Mrs. Thomas?
Yeah. Did I give you back that letter?
No, I told you to keep it. That was a copy I had
Oh,
made.
Yeah, I read that. And Stonebreaker operated for a good many years. He spread out.
That's one of the foremen of the Schumaker Ranch, Henry Gorman.
Henry Gorman. I remember Henry Gorman. Yeah.
Is this one is Sam Schumaker? Is he the Schumaker Ranch Schumaker? Or is that a different Schumaker?
No, T.C. Schumaker that owned the ranch. Now, he had a nephew, Hardy. They called him Hardy.
That's the same.
Yeah, I know it is, but maybe Hardy was a nickname.
Might have been.
This looks kind of like Hardy Schumaker. And this is Henry Gorman. Yeah, I remember Henry Gorman. He went to Alaska with George Mulligan.
Oh, he did. He went to Alaska.
George Mulligan, yeah. I know he was an awful good hand, and Schumaker didn't want him to leave. He offered him $1,000 a year to work for him. You know, that is $1,000 a year, you know. We're getting our men in those days are $15 a month, $20, and the top hand is $25.
25.
I went in 1902, I was 17 years old, and my father took me to Kansas there and put me to running that ranch, and he paid me $16 a month.
16.
I ran the ranch for about a year, and then he raised me to $25 a month, and I thought I was rich.
Then you could go down and bet on the horses.
No, I didn't ever bet it. No, I could have bought some of those cards though.
I was going to say, you could have gotten in
Yeah,
on
I could have
that.
bought some of those cards.
You could have gotten in on that then.
Got rich again.
Well, probably you would have, yes. Well, did your folks know Mr. Dudley?
Oh yes, my Uncle Charlie worked for him one summer.
Did.
He came out from Boston.
Yes, he sounded like a
Yeah.
fine gentleman.
Yeah,
I
he
just
was.
wondered if he was.
Came out from Boston. And in those days, why, there wasn't any fences, and all these outfits know that they'd run a wagon in the summertime, and the cattle in the winter they'd drift pretty badly. You know, there wasn't any fences, and all these cattle might drift there to the Canadian River, some of them. So they'd start out with a wagon, and Uncle Charlie worked for him, followed on the wagon one summer, and Harry Reese, he was an old-time shop hand, he was the wagon boss. And, well, I think he was. Dudley wanted him to run his wagon $35 a month, and Harry said he wouldn't do it. He said, I'll work for as a hand for 30, but I won't run your wagon for 35. And I think Dudley got somebody else to run his wagon, and they let the herd get loose, and then I think he put Harry in charge and gave him his $40 a month.
He just had one daughter, or that's the only person who was mentioned in that old letter. He had a daughter who came out here and stayed in the summer sometime.
Well, I forgot that part of it.
It's mentioned in the letter.
I guess I may have seen Dudley, but I don't remember it because I was a small boy in those days.
Do you have any idea in that letter, Mrs. Thomas describes her trip to Liberal on the train and then by wagon to the Anchor D. This was in 1891. And she said they didn't see any other houses except they stayed one night at the White Ranch on Gulf Creek.
There was a white lived in the country, but I didn't know where they lived.
And a half a mile away from the White Ranch was Mr. Quigley.
I remember Quigley. He had a horse ranch.
Where?
Oh, up here on northwest of Guyman someplace.
Well, that's comforting. I've been out there looking.
I couldn't tell you where that
And I
was.
wonder who could it have been, the Easterwood Ranch?
Well,
Could the White Ranch have been there before?
it could have been. Now, I don't know.
But I was very interested in that. They stayed the first night at Shades Well.
Yeah.
Then they rode all the way down, she said about 30 or 35 miles, I forgot what, to the White Ranch on Gulf Creek.
Well, I don't know where that was, but nor the Quigley Ranch. Now,
And
he had
nobody
a
else does either.
he had a horse ranch out there. Now, I don't think Whites lived there very long. They wouldn't known about it.
And those were the only places she said she saw.
I remember there was a girl named Zona White, and
What about the Quigley? There are some people, maybe in Elkhart, I think, named Quigley, and I just wondered if they were
I don't know whether I know Quigley only had a horse ranch and raised horses, and he'd sell horses to these cattlemen, these ranchmen, you know. And I remember got his horse put at his fence long ago, but I remember seeing lots of his horses.
There was also Mr. Wakefield, who had a horse ranch down by the 3C somewhere.
Wait, Brakefield.
Something
There was
like
a
that.
Billy Brakefield that used to work for. He might have had a horse ranch too. I think he worked for the 3C. I remember Billy Brakefield.
Well, I was reading an article in some old paper about this is 3C.
Yeah, that's I'm old Al Brown was riding. See, he'd ride his wheel mule and he had jerk lines. I remember Al Brown.
And this article mentioned some things that the 3C Ranch was guilty of in trying to get rid of, what did they call them? Nesters?
Well,
Homesteaders?
that's after the country come in settling up.
And inferred that maybe they had done a few of them in,
Well, I never heard of it. They did.
trying to run them off the pastures.
If they did, I never heard of it. Because those were fine people. They owned the 3C Ranch over 3C Gate. He was one of the owners, and he was a fine man. And you see, Cal Glenn was the manager, and he was a very fine man.
Who was the owner?
It was owned by Vickers, Vale, and Gate. They came in here from California or Arizona.
Arizona, I think I read
They
somewhere.
had ranches out there and came in here, and I understood that they fenced their pasture was 40 miles square. Now I don't know about that. And they script. You could buy script from a Union soldier, and with that script you could buy government land. And they got a lot of that script. And over their pastures, if it was 40 miles square, it might have been, I don't know, but that's what they did. They'd buy 40 acres here, and a 40 there, and a 40 there, and they'd put down a windmill on each 40. And a well and windmill and tank. And of course they grazed the government land free until it settled up. And of course when it's come in settling up, why, anyone you know would hate to see his business ruined.
Yes.
But you know that it couldn't be helped. We were the same way. Our pasture used to run clear up here close to Guyman, and it was about on the north side of the Coldwater, it was about 7 by 6 miles square, and then it ran. We operated the land clear over south there for 25 miles south of us, and it was all government land. And then Texas, before the Oklahoma settled up, Texas passed a law that one man could take 4 sections.
4 sections.
And then every other section was railroad land. You could take 4 sections, and you could lease 4 sections, and that made pretty good size place. And I know my father filed on some, and some of the employees would file on some, and later when they proved it up, they'd sell it. They could sell it if they want to, and they accumulated quite a lot of it that way, very low cost.
Was the OX Ranch about the earliest one of any consequence?
It was the earliest one that I know of, and it was over here on that old house is still over there.
Yes, sir.
Now that ranch was the only one here when my father came. It was on Beaver.
Only one.
And they had a cow camp on Frisco over here, just a camp. There where James later owned it. The old man, an old Hooker.
That was their camp? The old James place?
Yeah. And Hooker was their foreman. And when they left, I think they gave that camp to Hooker, and he gave it to his father-in-law.
Hooker was the OX foreman.
Yeah. And then he went up there where that house is still standing, where he lived, and he built that place up. Well, old D.C. Davis, he operated down here until, about the middle 90s, I guess.
Operated down
Here.
where?
He operated a ranch down here about the middle 90s, and then he sold out to T.O.J. And Whalen was his brother, T.O.'s brother. And then Hooker was up there, and he lived there until Schumaker bought him out. I remember Schumaker bought his ranch and cattle. He had 1,050 cattle. I remember that very distinctly. And Schumaker gave him $45,000 for it. And in those days, that was a lot of money.
Mm. But Mr. Davis,
D.C. Davis, yes.
did he occupy?
I believe they went up to see about that apartment. Yeah, that's what Lance told me this morning, that they was going up to see about that apartment. I just imagine that is why they didn't answer the phone. I imagine that's where they are now, and they'll be back pretty soon.
Did Mr. Davis occupy that, what was the old James place, that old stone place down there? Mm-hmm.
He lived there.
Before the James
Oh, yes.
took it.
Yes,
Mhm.
he lived there a number of years.
Well, legend has it, you know, that was an old buffalo camp before it was ever a ranch.
Well,
Wonder if that's true.
I don't know about that. I remember Uncle Charlie said that that was a cow camp belonged to the OX outfit.
Hmm.
And they might have been used for a buffalo camp too.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll see if I can't get in contact.
There was no connection, was there, between the OX Ranch in Texas County and the OX Ranch in Cimarron County. That has confused me every time I've read it.
Well, I didn't know there was no OX Ranch in Cimarron County.
Yes, I've read about it in several places.
There was 101 ranches
Yes.
in Cimarron County and 101 down at there in Oklahoma, you know.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know about the OX.
Yes,
I don't remember about it.
They had an OX Ranch.
You excuse me a minute. I'm gonna run up here to the apartments and see Lad just a minute.
All right.
We can give that message to.
All right.
And then I'll be right back. Go ahead.
All right.
The names of the people who had the OX Ranch, they were, was it McQuillan?
No. One of them name was Tower, I believe. Uncle Charlie talked about him. Tower.
Oh, yes, Tower.
And someone, they lived back east.
Yes. But then in later years, the people who lived there.
Was McQuillan.
McQuillan.
Yeah, Jimmy McQuillan.
Uh-huh.
He was cook now for the OX people when they operated that ranch. Jimmy was cook for them.
Oh.
And Jimmy, when Guyman started, he came to Guyman, and started the saloon.
Oh, he did.
And I think he drank up all his profits.
Drank up all his profits.
That's what they said.
Mm-hmm. Where was his saloon located?
The old El Paso saloon, it was right down there about where the abstract office is. And then Jim Henson moved to town from the Paladora, and he started the Senate Saloon.
Yes. Because here's the Senate Saloon, I know, in that picture.
Yeah. Well, the El Paso Saloon's right north of it, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And this is
The Star?
Star Grocery Company.
Star Grocery.
Yeah.
That's right. And this picture, I'm sure you've seen that many times. Old buffaloes.
Yeah. Old man Henderson lived there, and then he sold it to Birch.
Well, is that marker on the highway as you drive
Yeah,
up there, is that at the actual
Well,
spot?
that's right. I guess it is.
Where
Yeah,
Old
it is right
Buffalo
there. I guess
was.
it was.
But what they call the Old Buffalo School, you know, is
It's
back
on east.
of
I
that.
know it, but that was east of where the old house, the old Buffalo.
Uh-huh.
They had quite a little town there at one time. And
I was going to say, was that the only house?
No, I know my grandfather Westmore went over there and bought some town lots. I remember.
Oh, he did.
No, the McMains and several families lived in the Calverts lived there in Buffalo in the early days. I don't know,
Yeah, they did.
and they probably had 2 or 3
And
stores.
then, I have a list somewhere. She
McMains,
wrote down the names
McMains and
of some of
Calverts.
the people that she did.
Oh, they told what the wash basin had cost, a lot of money, and I don't know what all.
About the furnishings of
Yeah.
that house?
When they moved to Hudson, yeah.
Well, what, were they trying to impress somebody or something?
I guess so. I don't know.
I seen the Hooker paper last night, 50 years ago, where Mr. Lawmore up north brought 3 hogs to Guyman to the sale.
Mr. Who?
I forget his name, Lawmore. It's 50 years ago. See, I wouldn't know him. He brought, now that
Larrabee?
brought 3 hogs to sale.
It wasn't.
Oh, no, it was somebody who lived up north. But what I say, that was a big deal.
A
I brought
big
3,000.
transaction.
Yeah, well, I mean, he brought a wagon and team down here selling.
3 hogs.
3 hogs, yeah. Yeah, I see that quite often. Of course, more of the paper goes, see.
Yes,
It'd soon be up to my time in the paper.
mine too.
But the thing is, I just like to read them
Mm-hmm.
because it said there Roy Howe and Leroy Mauser had a bachelor party. Well, Roy Howe lives here. He's still a bachelor. Leroy got married a few years ago. Now there, see, you get.
Yes.
I like
Did you
to
know
listen to
Sherb
radio.
Reinhardt?
Yeah, I knew him.
Says early day cowboy.
Yeah.
For whom did he work?
He worked for 3 C's,
3 C's.
and he may have worked for Schumaker. I don't know, but I remember he worked for 3 C's. I remember telling he went to a dance one night. He had a good job, what they called a good job at the CC's. They paid him $30 a month. And he went to a dance one night when he was out at the wagon and didn't get back in time to stand his guard. And so the boss sent him, fired him into the ranch, away from the wagon, but because you had to get back in time to stand your guard. And he worked a while there and quit. And I don't know what became of him then. An early day cowpuncher. Yep. I remember a lot of those things, you know, and better than I can remember.
For whom did Perry Bright or whatever?
Perry Bright?
Who did he work for?
Well, I tell you, I don't think he worked for anybody much. He had a little outfit of his own.
And wasn't his place flooded and he
Yeah,
lost several
yeah.
members of his family?
He had a little outfit of his own, and then he leased that Point Rocks Ranch.
Oh, he
Brad,
did.
your mother called
And,
said that
They had a big flood,
Peter would like to talk
and
to the little lady
2 of his
sometime
daughters
today.
drowned
Drowned.
while he had operated that ranch. He was owning it. He owned it. That he leased it and had his own cattle.
Were they living there at the
And Perry
time
Girl
of that
called and
flood?
he wanted to talk to her.
That's north of Elkhart, isn't
North, north and a little west.
it? Uh-huh.
Perry Girl. Well, I imagine
And
this other
Con
probably
Jackson,
important, lad.
where was he
Well,
situated?
he worked for
All right,
Quigley. And after Quigley died, he married Quigley's widow.
Quigley with the horse ranch?
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
He married Mrs. Quigley. And she had some cattle and horses. And, of course, old Con, he wasn't nothing but a cowpuncher. And
He bettered himself somewhat.
oh, yes. Yes, Mrs. Quigley, they had a little outfit. And somebody, I heard, I don't know, that he worked for him. And maybe he said he kind of got sweet on Quigley's wife while Quigley was still living. Anyway,
Well, they said that. They were doing that even then.
well, that's what I heard.
Gracious, I thought the pioneers were above all that somehow. Or they were too busy or something, I don't know.
Too busy making a living.
Yes,
Most
to
of them
be
were.
fooling around.
Well, I don't know. That's what I heard.
That was rumor at that time.
But anyway, he
Uh-huh.
married her. Quigley died and he married her.
And they stayed out there on the...
Yes, and finally she died. And then Con went to New Mexico. And he got in with some Jews out there. And they gave him a lot of rope, you know, run their outfit. I think he's a partner, and I guess he did pretty well out there. They kind of took him in partnership with him. And he died, of course, like everybody does.
Yes, like, well.
Yeah.
Who went on this Alaska tour?
Yeah, talk about that again.
Who went on this
We
Alaska
haven't,
tour?
yet. You start out and tell us what you told us that day about going to Alaska.
Well, let me finish up about the old Stonebreaker Ranch here.
All right.
When Schumaker came in there, That's what he branded. He branded double X.
Double X.
Yeah. On the side. And then after he went broke, and Stonebreaker bought it from him, bought all the Schumaker holdings, Stonebreaker and Zay. Zay was the money end of it. And then Stonebreaker branched off up there on Gulf Creek. I don't think Zay had any interest in that. And bought a lot of ranches up there. And then he went down up there and bought the old Beatty Brothers. Beatty Brothers had the ranch that up there on northwest of at Point Rocks, and they sold it to Boyce and Streeter. Henry Boyce, he was a commission man in Kansas City, and Streeter was his brother-in-law. Boyce and Streeter operated it for a number of years, and they branded 2 Circles. And while I was on the ranch in Kansas, they always shipped from Markela, and they'd come through there and always stay all night in our pasture and watered our windmills. And they'd always give us a quarter of beef. But the last herd that when they closed out, was while I was there on the ranch, about 1907, I guess. I don't remember the year. I left 1908, the year before I left. Or that fall, I don't know, remember. Why then, that ranch was leased for a few years, and Perry Bright was leasing it when, I don't know whether Perry leased that ranch after Stonebreaker went broke or not.
Seems like I read the flood was in 1912 or 13 that took his 2 daughters.
Well, Stonebreaker must have bought it after that, because the winter of 1918, I think, or what really broke Stonebreaker. Anyway, Stonebreaker bought it, and he spread out so much, and then that hard winter and the low price of cattle, why, it broke him.
The hard winter of 19...
Well, I believe it was 1918 and 19.
He lost a lot of cattle.
Yeah, lost a lot of cattle, and then the cattle went down, and he was overextended.
Mm-hmm.
And he went into voluntary bankruptcy, which I would never have done, but
How
he
terrible.
did. And then that ranch, I think Perry... Anyway, Perry was living there. He leased it and was living there, and when his 2 daughters drowned. And, of course, who bought the Gulf Creek then? Well, Dillard Eastwood wound up with it, Gulf Creek, this lower east end, and somebody else bought the west end. Leon Allen bought part of the west end, I think.
When Mr. Stonebreaker went broke.
Yeah. Bought some of it now, a small part of it, and he sold it. And of course Dillard sold his, and the Frisco out here, McDermott bought that is on the creek, and various ones is divided up. Of course, Freeman bought the old Anchor D. Dudley place. But Stonebreaker ran the Double X brand for a while, and then he come in to run the Anchor D. He liked it better, and as long as he lived. And now, what did you want me to say about?
Oh, I mean, where did the Stonebreakers live before?
They lived in Kansas City.
They didn't have a place here.
No. Now his wife was a wife of old Bert Burnett, I think. And I think Schumaker worked for her. And she fell in love with him, I think, and got a divorce, I believe is the way it was, and married Schumaker.
Got a divorce from...
Her husband. And I think her name was Burnett, as I remember.
You're talking about Schumaker's wife, or Stonebreaker's?
That's Schumaker's wife.
That was Schumaker's
Yeah,
wife.
and old Stonebreaker, they lived in Kansas City. And Schumaker came out here from Kansas City. He moved to Kansas City and was living there when he bought this other out. And, of course, Stonebreaker also lived in Kansas City.
And they didn't have a home that they...
No, they just had a place out here. They'd come out sometime and stay. There's a ranch right there, this side of the old headquarters down here.
Wasn't so... It's not the Coon place, is it now?
Yeah, it is.
It is.
But there was a house right this side of there that the family lived when they come out in the summertime.
Oh.
Stay maybe.
I wondered if it was if it's been incorporated into the Coon Ranch home.
Oh,
They said part of it was an old.
No,
Someone said part of it was
the
an
old
house.
Coon, that was the old Grimmer's place.
It was.
You see, old Charlie Grimmer sold out. He was one that Schumaker brought out. Old Charlie Grimmer. And little Charlie Grimmer lived with him.
That was his nephew? Or his
I
son?
think his nephew, yes.
Uh-huh. Was it little Charlie who married Flo
Thrailkill,
Yes.
yes. I remember Flo was one of my, I always, when I was a little boy, you know, I got fell in love with grown women.
Did you?
Flo was one of them.
I see. And Florence Grimmer, whom I met down at the old Grimmer place on the Coldwater a few weeks ago, I went down there to take a picture of the house.
Yeah.
And I looked up, and there she stood. She was out there for a few days. And her name was Florence Grimmer from Dalhart, and she said she was named for Flo Thrailkill. And she said they lost touch with old Charlie and little Charlie many years ago.
Well, old Charlie married a woman from Kansas City, and she proved not to be a very good wife, as I understood it in those days. But little Charlie married Flo, and they lived together, I think. And
it tells in that letter of Mrs. Thomas's when they died.
I forgot.
Yes.
And then B. Thrailkill married Cal Glenn. Now, B was Flo's younger sister, and she married Cal Glenn. Cal was foreman of the 3C Ranch. And I have their wedding picture. Old John Keene had it, and I got it copied, and I have it down at the ranch. Wedding picture of Cal Glenn and B. Thrailkill. And of course, they went to Arizona when the 3C sold out. Why, they went to Arizona. Now, I understood that Cal bought a ranch out there, or bought something. But in 1928, my wife and our family went to Trinidad and got her mother and her stepfather, and went to Arizona to see her brother. And we got into Winslow, Arizona late one night and couldn't find a place to stay all night. And at the garage where we took the car, there was a young man there, a boy. He says, my mother's running a rooming house here, and I think you can keep you tonight. And we went to that rooming house, and B. Thrailkill, Cal's widow, was running it, that rooming house. And she had 2 daughters there that night, and she said they're going back down the southern part of the state tomorrow. But she is just a very modest rooming house. It's all right, only it is quite a step down for Cal's widow to have to make a living running a rooming house.
And this Grimmer on the Coldwater was Louis.
Louis's daughter. There's his granddaughter or something. Louis Grimmer was a cousin of old Charlie,
Of old Charlie.
I think, and little Charlie.
But the house is still standing out there.
Yeah, that's Louis's house. And I think the old Grimmer house might be standing out there yet at the Coon headquarters.
I'd like to go out there. They say they're, you ought to know them before you go out there. And I don't know them.
Well,
Mhm.
Dick Jackson's
Yeah.
operating it.
Dick Jackson, yeah, we'll give him permission to go on it. He's got a place.
But isn't there someone living out
I
there?
suppose so. I don't know.
A coon, I think, is living out there.
Maybe so.
This picture is the Bar Stonebreaker is in that picture.
Bar
somewhere.
Stonebreaker?
Mhm.
You might ask Dick Jackson.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Ask Dick Jackson to let you know what coons out there, and Dick knows them.
And to give me references and I could go up there and take a picture.
Oh, yeah. Visit around.
Mhm.
Be nice.
I'd like to see it.
I know where it is, but the thing is,
I know where it is too. It's just past the Cobb Frank Ranch, or the Frank Ranch, I mean.
Isn't Frank Ranch on the other side of it?
This side,
The Frank
Coons
Ranch?
on past.
It is.
Mhm.
Now, I'd forgotten. I thought there's Frank.
A mile or so.
Yeah, I don't know though. Well, I would know which is Boris. I would guess that would be Boris. I don't know. That or that. I don't know.
Mm. Whatever became of him.
Oh, he went back east, and I think he got married and was running a hotel someplace way back east there. Is the last I heard of it.
And it says Skillington in picture.
Skillington.
Bar Stonebreaker and Skillington
Uh-huh.
in picture. That's all it says. But he left the ranching business, I guess, incompletely.
Yes, he did. Well, I would think this is Skillington. I would think that is Boris. I would think that is Skillington. I don't.
Who was he?
Oh, he was just a kind of a fellow around Guyman here. Kind of. Oh, selling stuff. I think he got into me for a little bit, maybe. But
What sort of stuff was he selling?
Well, I don't know whether it was oil leases or royalty or something. I think probably money I put in, I lost it. I don't remember what it was.
No, those are the things we don't want to remember.
No.
I wouldn't want to
No.
remember it either.
No.
I surely wouldn't.
are you gonna tell us about them?
Yes,
putting that
now,
money together and
Have you
all
got time
going
to
to
tell us
last
that?
Oh, George Mulligan?
Yeah, I want to hear that.
Well, George Mulligan grew up down on the creek. I used to go to school with him. And
What creek?
get cold water. The schoolhouse was right down about 2 miles east of where we live, which was an old claim house. It was an old Watt Adams builder. And George left home, and they didn't know where he was. And
Well, go back just a minute. Was that the schoolhouse that your father had brought in?
no,
What?
no, that was the Eubank. That was down before they consolidated the. I started school down there. Well, of course, the first I went to school at Liberal for about 6 or 8 months. That was before 3 or 4 months probably. Liberal. My father took us to Liberal in 89. No, 89. And rented a little house and stayed there until March. And I remember they all got the whooping cough and it wasn't doing any good. And then they started a little subscription school down on Coldwater in a little claim shack. It was Harry Reese's claim shack, about a 14 by 14 rock house. We had little board benches in there. And then about a year later or two, they moved it on down in the Coldwater. That was about 1.75 miles east of our house where I live now. They moved it down there about half a mile farther down to a larger house that Watt Adams had built and lived in. And we went to school there for 3 or 4 years. And then later, they divided the district. That was the Eubank School. And moved it up. My father bought a house at Hugoton, Kansas. I think he gave $75 for it, and he and Uncle Jim Barley moved it down there. It was an old store building, frame house, pretty good building. And located about 2.5 miles above where I live on Coldwater, and we went there for several years until but that was after after we come back from going to school to Liberal. But George Mulligan, his father started out that. He left home and they didn't know where he was. And one day, Snyder's or Tyler's come by the schoolhouse there with a herd of cattle they were shipping, and George was with him. He'd been working for him. And I remember Mary, his sister, ran out there and she said, "Well, George, I'll have to have a kiss." She's on a horse. I guess she got her kiss. Mary was later married to Harry Clark, and was the sister of Ed Nash, mother of Ed Nash's wife. Anyway, the next time we heard of George, he'd been to Klondike in Alaska. And he came back down here about, I think, 1997 or 8. And he said he wanted to organize a company of 25 young men to go to Alaska and work his mines. He had some gold mines there, he said. So he got these 25 young men. Each of them was to pay $600, and he was to take them to Alaska, and they were to work his mines for 3 years. That $600 was to pay their way, and he was to take care of them, board them for 3 years there in Alaska. And they would work his mine, and he was to get 35% of the gold, and they were to have 65%. Divided among the 25.
He didn't leave a wife and family back then? He wasn't married?
As far as I know, he was never married.
Are there any of them around here? Mulligans?
I don't know of any of them. It was a big family. One of the babies died and was buried down there right up the old home place. It's got a little old rock place there.
Where was their home place?
About 2 miles below us. My father, I own it now.
Below you? That'd
Yeah, on
be
Coldwater.
east?
Yeah, east of us.
2 miles east.
Yeah, and the first funeral I ever went to was little Maggie Hooker. And she's buried down here on the old James place there on the hill.
Is that what that grave is?
The little Maggie Hooker. I went to the funeral.
Well, I've heard conflicting stories. Some people say, or someone said, you remember when the 2 buffalo hunters are supposed to have had a place on Frisco Creek and the Indians came? One of them went to Fort Adobe to get supplies and was there when they were attacked by Indians, and the other one stayed at the camp on Frisco Creek and was massacred, and they named Sharps Creek after him. Someone said they thought maybe that was the buffalo camp where Sharp was killed by the Indians,
No, that's little Maggie Hooker.
and that might be his grave.
No, that isn't.
But it's Maggie Hooker.
Maggie Hooker.
Well, you know, Mark Van Tyne will be very interested to know that that's
Because I
Maggie
went to the
Hooker.
funeral.
Maggie Hooker.
That's where he
How old a child was she?
Oh, she must have been 2 or 3 years old. Small.
And this would have been in 1890,
I don't know the year.
about somewhere in the 90s.
Yes, early 90s, yes.
I'm going to tell him.
Maybe the latter 80s now. I don't know the year. Because my sister Della, I know she read, they got some writings of hers, and she said they let her make her, they took her mother's wedding dress, Mrs. Hooker's wedding dress, and made a little shroud, and covered the
Yes.
casket with it, and made it, and my sister Della helped sew it on there.
That's what Pearl Van Tyne said my grandmother told her, that she thought...
Well, I'm glad to know that. Well, so will Pearl Van Tyne, because that's on their property.
Yeah.
And they weren't sure whose grave that was.
I was there one time.
Maggie Hooker.
And I guess that was before George Westmoreland came out here. That must have been in the 80s.
He's supposed to have come in 1888 or thereabouts.
Who?
George Westmoreland.
I don't remember the year they came. They came out, yes, I think they came out while we were in Liberal. My mother was in Liberal with us. They came there and stayed all night, you know, and that was in 89.
That was in 89.
I think it was.
Uh-huh.
But, that is years ago. My father, in the early days, he did most all of his freighting himself from Liberal. When he first moved down here,
When did they ship from Arkansas?
Well, when we were I was on the Kansas Ranch, that's where we shipped
That's where he shipped from.
from Arkansas. When we were down here, we shipped from Old Tyrone. Old Tyrone is about 3 miles east of where Tyrone is now.
Just below the Kansas line.
Yeah, just
so
this
they
side of
say.
the Kansas line.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we shipped there for years and years.
Mhm.
And there was thousands of Japs shipped from Old Tyrone.
Was that a rip-roaring place, like it said in some books?
They said it was, but when I knew it, there was nothing there but the stock pens. Of
Mhm.
course, that was when I was probably 10, 11 years old, and I was horse wrangler when we shipped them up there.
I think it was Christman who said what a rip-roaring place
I heard
that
it.
was,
I
with
heard it
gambling
was.
dens
Yeah, I heard
and
it was.
everything.
But you know, in the early day here, when our outfit ran a wagon, and they'd already have a kid for horse wrangler. When I was about 10, 11 years old, 12, I was horse wrangler when they ran a wagon and round up and brand and ship. And then when I was got to be about 13, 14, I was just a cowhand then, and George, my younger brother, he wrangled horses. He was about 10, 11. That's the way they worked it.
Mhm.
I was a full-fledged cowpuncher when I was 14. I
14.
stood the guard and everything.
Didn't you tell me you were too young to have gone to Beer City?
Yeah, I was too young.
Where was that?
That was just so
Oh,
it says in the book. Just
Oh, you mean over the line at Liberal? Oh,
over
no, they
in
had
Oklahoma.
no, that's while I was on the ranch in Kansas. They had a saloon down there. I wasn't too young, but I never went.
Oh, it had several saloons. That was supposed to have been the real place. Nothing but a bunch of saloons.
Well, and I think I told you wrong. I told you Alan Black got beat up down there and
Yeah.
died. It wasn't Alan Black. Alan Black did the beating up.
Oh, I see. All right. Well,
And
that's
I
straight.
knew the other old boy that died. He never did regain consciousness. And I was on the ranch in Kansas. His father, the fellow that died, was living on the old Skates place, right 6 miles south of where I lived there.
In Kansas.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I forget his name, but anyway, Alan Black was one of them that beat him up.
Your folks took you. You went to Kansas in 1889 and
Yep.
stayed until when?
I went to Kansas in 1902 and ran that ranch until 1908. No, my mother took us to Liberal in 1889. We only
That's what I
stayed there
meant.
about 3 or 4 months.
Oh, just 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And then you went back and ran the ranch from 1902
2 till 1908. I came back
to
down here in
1908.
1908. The winter before, I had gone to Winfield, Kansas, to a business college for 3 months. And
The winter before 1902?
in 1900, I guess. Or it was 1901, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to go back, and I asked my father if he'd pay me expenses, let me go back to college. He says, yes, I guess so. And then a day or two later, I was helping him hitch up he drove a buggy, it seemed, and he said, well, a boy that's 17 years old, he's too old to go to school. He said, I think you'd better stay here and run this ranch.
They hadn't heard of professional students in those days,
No.
had they?
I said, all right, I wasn't crazy about going back to school anyway. So
A boy 17 years old. It's too old.
I never went to any full terms, I don't guess, after I was 12. I'd go to maybe a half a term. Got about 3.5 years of high school. But I didn't mind it. I didn't like staying Liberal anyway. I'd always be glad to get back home. And I never started until we got through shipping in the fall. That'd be in October. Last of October.
Then you were living in Liberal.
At the same time, my grandfather must have been up there in the store in town, in Liberal. Because Mr. Ellison, he went back to Liberal and worked in that store. Was up there for several years.
Yeah,
Before they built his house here.
yeah, he was there. I knew George when he was there in Liberal, and then he was cashier in the bank there in Liberal for a while. Then they came after Guyman started. He came down here and run this store.
No, he was here first.
And
He
went
was
back
here
up there.
first. Then he went to
Went back
Liberal
up there.
and was there, and then he came back here and they built that house.
Well, what did become of your Uncle Arthur?
Well,
I guess he's dead now. Of course,
he is dead now. I
don't know what he was breaking on the railroad the last time I knew him.
don't really know exactly what happened. I guess it was just one of those.
After W.B. Slaughter sold out up here on Coldwater, he went to Delhart, and he still handles some cattle.
I understood that he bought it. He got $300,000 or 3% money. I don't know where he got it. But old Sid Lackey was a cattle inspector at that time down here. And he was telling me about it. He was the inspector, Hitch inspector, and he'd stay out at our place a lot of times and help us different all. He said W.B. Slaughter got $300,000 of 3% money and went to Pueblo, Colorado and bought a bank. Bought the Mercantile National Bank. Well, he put Coney in there to run it.
That was a big mistake.
He proved it. So Coney proceeded to break that bank. Before he went up there, he married Eloise Oakes in Delhart. Now, Slaughter and Oakes had the bank in Delhart. He married Eloise Oakes. And he bought it and put in Coney in as cashier. And old John Lanners, he was an old-time cowman over there on the Paladora. He used to work for Snyder, let's see. He worked for Snyder's a long time, then he went to working for Slaughter's. And then after he had a ranch of his own over there. Anyway, he saw Coney in El Paso. And old John told me, said, I saw Coney down there, and he'd run his hand down his pocket, and he pulled out $1,300. He said, head right down his flank.